The Hunger Games movies are probably the most divisive book-to-movie adaptations that have ever been made. Every other franchise has some agreed-upon consensus that most people fall into. Like, I've never seen anyone say that the Lord of the Rings franchise are bad book-to-movie adaptations, or that the Percy Jackson films are good book-to-movie adaptations. God, these movies were awful. Why is Annabelle's hair brown? Who wrote this script? Why are the practical effects so ugly? Meanwhile, people seem to be pretty split on the Hunger Games. The first two got a 3.5 on Letterboxd, which is pretty good, but nowhere near the hype of the Harry Potter movies, or the low score of Dune from the 80s. Personally though, I loved these movies when I was younger, and after reading the books and rewatching the movies, I like them even more. Well, kinda. Yeah, the thing about these movies that you just kinda have to accept is that the changes they made are wildly fantastic and wildly bad. There are some things that I think make the story so much better, and some that make parts of the story so much worse. So I thought I'd take a look at the two extremes. Now, let me say this right off the bat. Some sequences are just easier to be filmed, and some sequences are just easier to be written. That's not what this list is about, though. This is just the specific character and story changes that I think were very good and very bad. Oh boy. It pains me to say that my third worst film change comes from the best movie, Catching Fire. Even though I have very few problems with this movie overall, and even prefer it to the books due to the exciting sequences and strong set pieces, Finnick and Katniss are worse in every way. First of all, their chemistry is non-existent. I get that this movie is a lot more about Peeta and Katniss, but the books had really interesting sexual tension between Katniss and Finnick, who is a fan favorite character in both mediums. I would have loved to see that same chemistry that was in the books, but this movie doesn't really seem interested in these two at all, romantically or platonically. I'm not acting like the books had convinced me that these two were in love, but all the flirting in the books gave insight to a new side of Katniss that we had never really seen before. In the movie, Katniss and Finnick hate each other. Not only is there no chemistry at all, but Katniss actually seems to be disgusted by him. The scene where they're lining up before the chariots is really hard to watch, because it seems like she doesn't want anything to do with him. Then at the cornucopia, when they have that iconic moment where Finnick says,
"Good thing we're allies, right?"
It just doesn't make any sense to me. She's been pretty clear that she doesn't like you, Finnick, just move on. The movie does kind of make up for this later by having Katniss realize that he's selfless, but it's just not as interesting as the books. I understand why she does eventually team up with him, but they don't really have a strong relationship, and it doesn't get better in the next movies. It's functional though, which is why I couldn't rank this change higher than it already is. This change comes from the last two movies. I don't find these movies to be great overall, but one thing I really respected that they did was changing President Coin. One of the most important things about the ending of this franchise is the murder of President Coin. It's shocking, it's bold, and it speaks to the growth Katniss has endured throughout the story. Both mediums nailed it. The build-up of this conclusion, though, is where the film excels. In the book, President Coin seems to be evil right from the start. She's constantly in a bad mood, and the more the book goes on, the more she seems hell-bent on ruling Panem. In the books, the moment where she assumes the role of president is barely given any thought, since the reader already knows that she's extremely corrupt. Movie President Coin, on the other hand, barely does anything bad until she realizes that she has the upper hand on President Snow. She then starts to show her true colors in front of Katniss for the first time, and once she proposes a second game using the Capitol's children, that's when I believe Katniss decides to kill her. I like this a lot more, because it's more exciting to see a well-meaning good guy grow into a dictator, rather than a villain who is bad from the start. It also works really well with the movie's theme of dictators can come from anywhere. Not only is she from Disgrace 13, she was assumedly a pretty nice person before the temptation of power won her over. Besides, I always like when a villain goes through a personal change in front of the audience, rather than just a twist villain. I think I'm not alone in that. Alright, these last two changes are downright dumb. Some of the changes that the films made are bad but understandable, but these last two are just stupid. Why would you ever make Gale and Katniss this much in love? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just the actors and their delivery, but Katniss and Gale make out way too much in the second movie. Since the second movie is the most important one, being the transition between the before and actual war, it's crucial that this movie starts showing us the relationships that are going to be important in the next two movies. In Catching Fire, Katniss is constantly at Gale's side, and she doesn't seem to want Peeta at all, unless they're in front of the cameras. Then I guess they forgot about Gale and Katniss, because in Mockingjay Part 1, Peeta is suddenly the most important person in Katniss's life. Like, she said she wanted to run away with Gale before the 75th games. That was in the second movie. Then the games happen, and she's in love with Peeta. I guess she could have grown close with them during the games, but I never thought that they were in love, even when the cameras were on. The scene where they talk about their favorite color is the most awkward thing I've ever witnessed. Plus, those games were like 4 days long. You're telling me after a year of living 10 yards apart from each other, 4 days in the arena is enough to make them fall in love genuinely? All they had to do was add a couple scenes where they were showing signs of being flirty. I don't even care if it's during the games. At least you can have the viewers guessing how real it is. One scene at the beach where they talk about their game strategy just isn't enough to sell me that Katniss loves him more than Gale. And then in the next 2 movies, just to make things worse, she completely loses any feelings for Gale now that Peeta's life is at stake. The whole thing is just not cohesive, and I wish they had done it better. Like I said in the intro, I actually saw the movies before I read the books. That's why it surprised me so much how the capital citizens were portrayed. It made me realize how used to I was the ditzy partygoers in the second movie. I cannot stress enough how amazing of a change it was to see random people dressed up in their absurd uniforms talking about how they love to throw up food so they can eat more, or how they all need to wear solid gold because they need to be matching. It's absolutely incredible. You could argue that this is more of a visual change, so it technically violates my rules, but when I read the books, I don't see much of a difference between the districts and the capital, other than wealth. They never specify what the capital does with that wealth, or what they wear, or how they act. The only time we get a look into what these people are like are the stylists. Honestly though, they act more confused on what poverty looks like than ditzy. I love how this makes the citizens of the capital look. They're easily manipulated. They're shallow. Instead of having sympathy for the masses, the viewer hates their guts. With their over-the-top fashion and their laughter while children are literally being killed, it really solidifies the us versus them mentality that the districts had. And it helps to see the entire state as the enemy, not just President Snow. After all, if no one watched the Hunger Games, there would be no Hunger Games. Alright, before we get to the top and bottom spots, I want to quickly talk about a couple changes that I'm pretty mixed on. Katniss in the first book is a lot more mean than in the movies. Yes, this is probably a good thing, seeing as though Katniss has a pretty good character arc of being kinder that lasts throughout the 3 books. Still, knowing what I know about how well the 4th movie redeemed Katniss, I'm not sure it was a good idea to have her be this mean in the beginning. I mean, I know she freaks out when Peeta says that he likes her in the first movie, but in the book, she straight up beats him up for it. That's not really compelling, and it's kind of annoying to see Katniss act this unlikable for this long. Still, the first book is pretty amazing, so it's kind of excusable. While Cato was a pretty important character in the books, it's almost like he's the only career in the movie. He's the main bad guy who stays until the end of the 74th games. He gives that great speech that inspired Katniss, and he's the guy the cameras keep pointing to. While I hate that this takes away from the other characters' screen time, it's kind of nice to have an antagonist that's so evil and so sympathetic. I mean, the villains in the rest of this franchise have no redeeming qualities, and Cato's certainly a lot more memorable in the movies than in the books. I just wish the rest of his group had had some screen time too. Alright, back to the ranking. Look, I like the original movie quite a bit, okay? But this change is honestly why the book is so much better. District 13. District 13 in the original book is extremely important. Of course, it's seen as a beacon that represents the capital's only act of mercy, but its main purpose is actually to be a safe haven for Gale and Katniss. If you haven't read the books, this is not going to make sense, but it's a really interesting part of the first book. In both mediums, there's a lot of discussion on leaving 12, but the book actually gives Gale and Katniss a place to go. District 13. They noticed that in the video that the capital plays of 13, supposedly live footage of its ruins, there's a bird that flies in the same direction in the top right corner of the screen. It's a recording. While I was reading this, I thought I'm 40% done the book, and they still haven't done the reaping yet. That's because instead of the reaping, 2 children from 13 actually visit 12 and talk about what it's like. Katniss and Gale actually prepare themselves to leave, like they have a real plan. They're literally going to follow through right after the reaping. but then Prim's name gets called. This is such a brilliant idea. Every time I read about the war in the next books, I thought about how they could have escaped to 13 instead of setting off a chain reaction that ended with bloodshed. But apparently this compelling point wasn't good enough to be added into the movie, because why would it be? Now Katniss and Gale just say they'll run into the woods, which they both know is an idiotic idea. Where are you gonna go? Hunt? In the woods for the rest of your life? They would go insane. So instead of being planned and calculated, it feels more like a couple of throwaway lines. Not only does this remove any sort of tension of whether they're going to leave 12 behind, but it also makes District 13 come out of nowhere. 13 isn't even mentioned in the first movie at all. The second movie doesn't do much better, by the way, by mentioning it one time before the plane ride. In the books, that plane ride to 13 felt like such a smart evolution of the story. In the movies, it feels more like the writers trying to find a way to keep Katniss safe after the destruction of 12. I just don't understand why you would remove one of the most memorable moments in the first book, especially when it makes the rest of the series make absolutely no sense. It's definitely a gaping problem with the whole series, and my number one biggest problem with the movies in general. Anyway, let's move on to a good change. Effies Redemption arc. This is one of the many reasons why I love the second movie so much, and I was so upset when I read the books and realized it wasn't there. Effie in the books is boring. There. I said it. She doesn't die, she doesn't come back, she's just a servant to the Capitol. In the movies, she's one of the most dynamic characters in the entire franchise. The first movie paints her just like the rest of the Capitol. She's constantly obsessed about her looks, and she always wants to have the best of everything. Here's the thing though. She's never evil. Even while she's watching the informational video and picking kids at the reaping, she never sees them as less, but she doesn't have much sympathy for them either. Then, the second reaping in the second movie happens. This is probably the best moment in the franchise. I love President Coin's assassination, I love Rue's death, I love the fog scene and the end of the second movie, but this scene works so well on so many levels. Instead of a normal reaping where Effie calls out names, she now reads them with pain in her chest as she understands the cruelty of the Capitol. Katniss is the only lady, so she must return to the arena even after all the suffering she endured. The acting from Elizabeth Banks is incredible, which I feel very guilty about saying, but let's, it's fine. Yeah, let's just move on. Then Effie goes to congratulate them before they go into the arena. Unlike the first time though, she's fighting back tears. This shows just how much realization Effie has gone through. The Hunger Games are not a reality TV show that she can just watch on the screen anymore. She has grown to care for these people, and it's very likely they'll both die publicly for no good reason. Once they leave the games, Effie joins the districts. This incredible journey is not only an amazing extension of Effie's character, but it also helps ground the movie in general. It isn't as black and white as everyone in the Capitol is bad and everyone in the districts is good. There are dictators in the districts and good people in the Capitol. In fact, Effie is a really good contrast to Coin. Coin is a good person that turns into a bad one, given the circumstances of the war, while Effie is able to become her best self for the same reason. It adds a really interesting opposition that just isn't there in the books. Honestly, this change single-handedly justifies this movie's existence. While looking back at the movies, I'm pretty confident when I say that they were a success. While the back half doesn't live up to the first half, they were all good adaptations. I even like a lot of the stuff that the first two movies added, and I don't think they broke the pace at all. Even those last two films did a lot right, and the most iconic moments still hit pretty hard. Just add District 13 into the first movie next time, okay? Seriously, you have nothing to lose, and it not only makes the first movie way more interesting, but it actually makes the next movies make a ton of sense. Do you want me to give the second movie a 10 out of 10 rating instead of the 9 it's currently sitting at, or not? Anyway, I gotta go lock myself in the basement so I can go finish the Disney ranking. Bye!